Welcome to the Redbird Report, your destination for the latest on the St. Louis Cardinals. Here are your hosts, BK and T-Bone.
Welcome back. Episode 4 of the Redbird Report alongside Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. We told you guys last week that we would be doing things a little bit differently for this show. We said specifically we're going to be using an audio-only version of the show for the following week. That's been the opposite of what's taking place. We got some new digs in here. This is unbelievable. Shout out to the video department for helping us out with this. If you have not checked us out on YouTube yet, highly recommend doing so. YouTube.com/101ESPN STL is where you can go to find us. We've got a new setup in here, an unbelievable studio, and this is where we're going to be doing the show moving forward. So, again, shout out to the video department for making that all possible. That is where you can go to find us, but be sure to still subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast as well. All right, T-Bone, last time that we talked, the Cardinals had just dropped a hugely disappointing game on the road at Pittsburgh, lost that one in extras, and what lied ahead was a 3-game set at home against Philly, going straight into a 3-game series against Houston. You had a massive disadvantage on the pitching side of things, and there were legitimate questions of, is this where the season goes off the rails? Because that's what happened over each of the past 2 seasons. They get in, maybe they give you a little bit of hope, and then boom, 10-24. Boom, 15-24 through the first 39 games of the season last year. The opposite took place. The Cardinals looked pretty darn good in the 6 games that we saw in their homestand. 4-2 overall was their record against the Phillies and the Astros. Those are 2 legitimate contenders this season. And it was the pitching that showed out. The hitting was good. They came through in big situations, but the pitching was the star of the show. In the last 8 games, the Cardinals rotation has a 1.1 ERA. Let me say that one more time. In the last 8 games, the Cardinals rotation, which is the weakness of this team in 2025, has a 1.1 ERA. No, that's not sustainable. You're not asking them to be that. But they've been awesome. What have you seen from them?
Well, I think they have finally kind of established themselves. And some of it was, Sonny Gray, for example. I'll use him to start off. We know Sonny's stuff is really good, right? We know he's going to end up being a number 1. Really, his stuff got inflated from really the one bad inning against the LA Angels. And that's the theme for these guys right now. They're avoiding the bad innings. Like Eric Fetty, for example, has kind of tight-roped around some bases-loaded jams, but he hasn't allowed that big crooked number to go up on the scoreboard. Same for Matthew Liberatore in his last start. Didn't have that one big inning that really got away from him. Palante doesn't really hike up the pitch count when he loads up the bases like he did in the Boston series. That's been the biggest thing for these guys, is they are avoiding that one inning that really cost them throughout that previous stretch before our last podcast. And with that, avoiding that, keeps the pitch count low, you eat innings, you remain efficient, and it allows your team to have some success. Look, the offense, I don't have any questions about it anymore. We wondered how would they survive the injury of Ivan Herrera. Now maybe there's some questions with Mason Wynn on the IL. Man, they're still hitting. They just need support from the pitching staff, and the rotation is doing its job now. It is eating innings. It is doing a good enough job to keep the bullpen healthy for them. I like what we are seeing. They now have the formula for success. Look, they just need the pitching to be fine. If the pitching is fine, they are going to be okay because of how good the offense is.
Yeah, and it's the starters that make everything else possible. Because if your starter gets 6+ innings into the game and they give you a chance to win, so you give up 4 or fewer runs. I'm not even asking necessarily for a quality start because the offense is good enough that you could score 5 runs in some of these games. You ask the bullpen to come in and just lock it down on the back end. But if your starter goes 6, gives up 4 runs, that's not asking a lot out of them. It's just getting efficiency out of them. Your offense gives you a chance, and then you can go to Kyle Leahy or JoJo Romero and then Phil Maton and Ryan Helsley to close that thing out, and you see what the formula is. Last year, we talked about this a lot. It was get to the 7th inning with a lead, and you've got your formula of locking it down at the back end of the bullpen. You've got Kittredge, you've got Helsley, and then they kind of piece things together with Fernandez or JoJo, whoever it ended up being in that 7th inning. This year, you're already settling into that. And it happened quicker than I thought it would, T-Bone, because when you look at the way that the bullpen was constructed early on, there were a lot of guys that were either underperforming or you didn't know what the role was going to be. And so now you look at it, Leahy has grabbed that role. He is your 7th inning reliever now. There's no question of who is Ollie Marmol going to turn to whenever they get into that inning. Now it's very clear. He's the guy. So it's about getting to that inning. How do you get to the 7th? What is the plan there? And as long as your starter gets you through at least 5, you've got a pretty good bridge there. And now they're getting that from their starters. The bullpen has started to settle into some of these roles. And in that same 8-game stretch that we were just talking about with the rotation, where their ERA is 1.5, it's a 2 ERA for your bullpen. And they're giving up a 200 batting average against. So opposing offenses, and we're talking about the Phillies and the Astros in this. We're not talking about, going up against the Pirates for the entirety of this stretch, or going up against the Rockies or some of the lesser teams in Major League Baseball. No, these are 2 teams that came into the season with at least realistic expectations of being playoff teams, and they're struggling to figure out how to put together any kind of offensive performance against your pitching staff. Nobody saw this coming. It came out of nowhere.
No, I think if you would have asked me, I think we did this a couple of times on the show, which is going to be has the potential to be more in the top 10, right? Your offense or your pitching. And I would have said, look, as low as I was on the offense had a higher ceiling than the pitching staff, because I think the pitching staff as a whole is fine. But they can go through stretches like this. And to your point on Ali Marmol now being able to kind of solidify roles and figure out, hey, here's what we want to do. We want Leahy for the 7th. We want Maton in the 8th and Helsley in the 9th inning. It's kind of okay, who figures out the 6th inning? As long as you have 3 guys, it doesn't matter the order of, it has to be in the 7th through 9th inning rules. Because if, say, you got the heart of the order coming up, right? Say Palante has a tough outing, 5 innings, does his job, you've got the lead, but pitch count really ballooned on him. 6th inning, heart of the order is coming up. Well, you now know who the guy to turn to is. It's either Leahy or Maton. When you get to the bottom of the order, then you can kind of go more towards that middle part of, okay, who do we want to figure out? Let's figure out if Fernandez can kind of get his stuff righted. Maybe there's that lefty lane and we're working with JoJo Romero. Now that you have 3 arms, everything is a little bit easier to game plan for, rather than what it was when they were going to Ryan Fernandez while his stuff wasn't there was, okay, well, we don't really trust Fernandez, so now we got to figure out 2 innings compared to just 1 if our starter only gives us 5. It's a recipe for success, and you mentioned like the bullpen and the starting rotation and their numbers through the stretch. If I would have told you at this point in the season where the Cardinals are 9-9 through 18 games, they are one of just 3 MLB clubs that are top 10 in Fangraph WAR in both pitching and hitting, right up there with the LA Dodgers and the San Diego Padres. I would sign up for that. Even though the record is only 9-9, I would have signed up for that.
It also tells you that, hey, if you get a little bit more luck, like part of what their record is just the extra innings performances. They've had 4 extra innings games so far this year, and they were 0-4. They haven't won any of them. If they were what you would expect to be, which is right around 500 in those games, well, now you're talking about a team that is a couple of games above 500, and you feel pretty darn good about it at this point in the season. Everything, it feels very Blues-like in this regard. Now, I'm not telling you they're going to go on some crazy 17-game winning streak the way that the Blues did with their 12-game winning streak to break their franchise record. I'm not saying that at all. But early on in the Blues season, we were talking about it. It was like, hey, man, you can't ask for anything more from these young players. No, it's not necessarily the record that you'd expect, but Dylan Holloway looks great. Philip Broberg's been everything you could have asked for. You're getting positive returns from Jordan Kyrou, who's better defensively than you expected. You're getting all of these great individual accolades. And then just as a team, it hasn't quite been up to snuff. Well, eventually it all turned, and then they figured it out as a team as well. On the Cardinals side of things, one thing that I'm curious about with what's coming up is that they're in this 6-man rotation situation right now. And it's hard to say exactly how long they're going to go with this. They definitely wanted it for the 13 games and 13 days stretch. And the way that Ollie Marmol explained it, I was down at the ballpark the other day, and he was basically saying, listen, all of them, other than Fetty for 1 start, have been on 5 days rest for the entirety of the season thus far. And they would like to keep that, it sounds like, for at least the month of April, because that's where the majority of these injuries take place for rotations. You look at it, and the Cardinals, I think, have, at the time, they had like 2 guys that were on their 40-man roster that were on the injured list. And most other teams in baseball are like 5 plus.
Yeah,
some of them are like 12. Yeah, it's crazy how many injuries there already are at this point in the season. So they're trying to avoid that. Part of that is because they have no depth. You look at it, like Quinn Matthews, who was the 7th man most likely in their rotation, well, he just went down. He's out for a while potentially. Your 7th starter right now behind Michael McGreevy down in AAA, Sim Robersa.
Might be Graceffo too. And we just saw what he looks like in long outings.
He wasn't ready.
Yeah.
So they want to keep these guys healthy come hell or high water, and the 6-man rotation they believe will help them in that regard. Cool. I understand that. Where it gets tough is when one of these starters or multiple of them do not get deep into the game. We have not seen this tested just yet because Steven Matz was just reinserted into the rotation, and now you don't have that arm to potentially give you innings coming out of the bullpen. They've had to do that a couple of times this year where Matz just basically finishes out the game after a starter gets blown up or whatever. Well, now you look at the bullpen, and instead of having the 8 arms, you have 7. And one of those 7 arms is Matt Swanson, who we know nothing about. We have no idea how his stuff is going to play at this level. So in terms of guys that you trust, it's really 6 that you can go to at any given time right now. Covering innings with those guys right now is going to be difficult. So it puts that much more pressure when you're going up against the Mets or the Braves on this road trip. Man, these starters, it's not just you want them to get deeper into games. You almost need it. So I will be curious for Ollie, who was not going deep into these games pitch count-wise with the starters earlier on. Now that you are a few weeks in, do you consider pushing them? Do you go 100-plus pitches with Miles Mikolas if need be? Do you push him maybe the extra inning, even though you know in that individual game, it might not be the best thing for you, but to keep everything sustainable, it might be necessary. What do you do with Fedde, who last year lost gas by the end of the season? What do you do with a guy like, I don't know, Sonny Gray, who almost never goes 100-plus pitches? Are you going to push these guys now with their pitch count because they have the extra rest built in with a 6-man rotation? Ollie, I think, is going to be a really interesting key component to all of this and how it works. And the pitchers themselves with their efficiency and their effectiveness are also going to be key.
Yeah, and to that point on like, hey, maybe we need to push a guy another inning. What makes this interesting is Ollie last year with Sonny Gray made reference to, especially when we would bring up on air, like, hey, I don't like how he's not going another inning. He had maybe 20 pitches to play with. And it was, hey, we're banking innings or pitches for later in the season. Okay, I disagree with that, but I can get the understanding of that. What makes this interesting is one guy I would circle in this is Matthew Liberatore. Liberatore's going to be on an innings limit by the time we get to the end of the year because he just hasn't come out. He's not stretched out to do that.
That's a
right?
good point.
That's the guy that it becomes interesting of, okay, well, if we have to push him early on, we're not saving up innings for later in the year. Now, maybe their counter to that would be, well, hey, we'll push him to the bullpen and we'll have McGreevy slide into that spot. Okay, that I can get. That would potentially work.
Oh, dude, can you imagine if this team is in a playoff race down the stretch and they say, we've got an innings restriction on Matthew Liberatore. He's got to go to the bullpen now because he can't get pushed past 120 innings. Oh, that's something for a later date to discuss, but man,
I can't wait for that selling point. Woo. But that's what makes this interesting, that you go with the 6-man rotation. And look, I don't like a 6-man rotation, but I can understand their logic behind it and why they want to do it. So, okay, that's fine. But you're right, it puts so much more pressure on these guys. And that's why I found it interesting. You mentioned the Swanson call-up. I'm surprised that they did not keep Rodri Munoz up here much longer than they did, because I thought the whole purpose of his call-up was, hey, he's supposed to be the guy that kind of becomes the long man now that Matz is out. Though he's been built up as a bullpen arm, he can go potentially multiple innings, and they decided not to do that. And it also allowed for Leahy to push into a more high-leverage spot. So I'll be fascinated to know how they do it, because you're right. They're going to have to start pushing these guys, because all it takes is for one guy to not do his job and get, the Mikolas start. And I'm not going to say Mikolas has another one of those. The hope is he doesn't. But we've seen this. Every guy has one of those starts. One day the stuff's just not there. You end up giving up 6 earned runs. You got to be pulled in the 3rd or 4th inning. The moment that start comes for this team, if it comes during this 13-game stretch, everything just potentially has the chance to snowball to where the bullpen starts to get gassed. And now you're looking at it and you're going, man, I don't know what to do now because our bullpen arms are tired. We got to push our starters because of this. And it creates that snowball effect. That's why a lot of teams, and I thought The Athletic wrote this very well, why a lot of teams don't like to go to a 6-man rotation. So I'm fascinated to see how this plays out for the St. Louis Cardinals.
It's part of what makes all of this compelling to watch over the next couple of weeks, is because I get the strategy in theory. Like, if you just told me, hey, BK, here's our idea. We want to keep our starters healthy. That's what our number one priority is. Yeah, I get that. That makes all the sense in the world to me. All right, now what's the goal? How do we achieve that, right? Well, we're going to have to limit the number of pitches that they throw in an individual game. And then we're going to increase the rest that they have between starts. All of this puts more pressure on our bullpen, which is the maybe most flimsy part of our team right now that we have. Okay.
Yeah.
Admirable goal. Understand it. I do wonder, are you potentially getting yourself into a position where, in order to buy yourself health in August, you're limiting your ability to bank wins now? So you want these guys healthy in August because you want them for the stretch run. But in order to put yourself into a position where the stretch run matters, in order to put yourself in a position where you're trying to buy at the deadline potentially, you've got to win these games right now. And the best way to do that might be actually pushing these starters a little bit more, whether that is either individual games pitch count, or having less rest. You kind of have to choose where are we going to compromise here. And they're doing neither of those two things. And I'm not telling you it's necessarily the wrong plan. It's just an interesting one, and one very few other teams across Major League Baseball are implementing, especially when they are as light as the Cardinals are when it comes to their pitching and the number of options they have both in the bullpen and in the rotation. So I don't know how they make this thing work long term, both in the here and now and also once we get deeper on into the season. It's up to Ollie Marmol to make that happen, and ultimately up to the pitchers to execute it.
Well, and two things for me. One, I mean, you mentioned the fact that now when you're talking about them from that rotation standpoint of, hey, now we really kind of start to thin out this bullpen because now we're one arm shorter. Now you potentially have guys that have to throw multiple innings. Well, okay, you're worried about the health of the starting pitching, which I get because that one is much more harder. You also now are potentially putting the bullpen more at risk of injury, right? Why do the Cardinals not want to throw Ryan Helsley 2 innings? It's because of health. And now there are times where I think they need to do that, but why do they not want to do that? It's because of health. Well, now you've got guys that potentially are going to start doing that more. So you now put them a little bit more at risk towards injury. And then the second thing for me is it goes back to the whole conversation of messaging from the Cardinals.
Yeah.
It feels like there's two different messages going on when you go to a 6-man. And again, I don't have the biggest issue with going to the 6-man. I probably wouldn't have done it, but I understand the reasoning for it. So the organization says, hey, we want to win in April so we can bring the fans back out to the bullpen or bring fans back out to the stadium. And now I'm looking at it and the management side's going, well, we got to worry about August. Well, that's two different messages that are going on right now. So long as it works, okay, then that's fine. Then it doesn't matter. But if this ends up backfiring of, hey, the bullpen suddenly starts to wear down because we went to a 6-man rotation, well, now we have to look and go, okay, so then what were we banking for in August when we have to play for basically July? I mean, they basically have till July, All-Star break, I would say, middle of July. Because by then, Mo's going to know whether or not he should be selling pieces off from this roster.
And then that makes the decision on what they're going to look like down the stretch. All right, one piece that we know is here right now and is likely to be here after the deadline as well is Brendan Donovan. He's been unbelievable. He leads Major League Baseball with 27 hits so far on the season. 27 hits in 18 games for Brendan Donovan. He's come to the plate 71 times so far this year. He has resulted in a hit at least 27 times. It's been amazing to watch. We knew Brendan Donovan was a good player. That's not surprising. The degree to which he's been one of the best players in Major League Baseball so far this year, that is a bit surprising. He's top 3 in average right now, batting .380 on the season. And when you look at his OPS, he's at .965 so far. A few of the guys that are behind him, just to give you a few names. Shohei Ohtani is a little below him in terms of the OPS. Alex Bregman, slightly below him. Manny Machado, slightly below Brendan Donovan so far this year in terms of OPS. Kyle Tucker is almost exactly where Brendan Donovan is, and Kyle Tucker was like the story of Major League Baseball for the first week of the season. So that just gives you a glimpse into the absurdity of his start. T-Bone, we had this conversation on our show today, and I brought up the notion of, hey, do you consider extending Brendan Donovan? This is not a necessary thing to do. He has 2 years left on his contract. He's making $2.5 million this year. He's got the arbitration process in place for the next 2 seasons. The Cardinals have his rights, and they will have his rights until he turns basically 30 years old. He'll probably make around $5 million next year, and through the arbitration process, if he continues to play well, somewhere around $8 to $10 million in that second year of arbitration as well. And then he becomes a free agent and he can go wherever he wants to. But if you're the Cardinals and you wanted to extend him right now, it probably looks somewhat similar in terms of the money that you'd have to lay out to what the Dodgers just did with former Cardinals infielder Tommy Edman. Now, Edman signed a 7-year deal. I think that this would be something a little different for Brendan Donovan, and he was also entering the final year of arbitration. If you were the Cardinals and you wanted to go to him with an extension, probably looks something like a 5-year deal, $50 million, somewhere around there. And that's including this season, the 2.5 that he's already making. I think before we even get to the discussion of should you do that, it's really a conversation of how do you view Brendan Donovan as part of the Cardinals' long-term plans? because it's easy to see he's a good player. You want to have this guy around. But he's 28. He'll be 29 next year. You are in the bit of a transition. You have a lot of middle infielders, a lot of lefties in this lineup. How do you view Brendan Donovan and his role, not just for the here and now, but for the next 3 to 5 years as part of what the Cardinals are trying to build here?
So I will probably be the one that right now is going to come off as more of the negative on Brendan Donovan. But I still view Donovan as more of a complementary piece for if you want to build a team that ends up ultimately getting to the World Series. To me, like Brendan Donovan hitting in the 3 spot, he's been excellent. Credit to the Cardinals coaching staff for deciding to put him there because I didn't think that this was going to work for them. I still don't think when you're building this team for the future, if you have Brendan Donovan hitting in the 3 spot, I don't think that is going to be successful for you. I think that is a spot that you look to upgrade, and Donovan belongs more in like the 5 hole where Alec Burleson is right now. So I don't think that that is a player you build around. I think that is more of a complementary piece that winning teams end up needing. And that's why I would look at the side and say, hey, yeah, I'm not a guy that's going to give him a contract extension because he's not really a guy that I am building around. He is not a part of the heart of the core for me. He is not like the big 3 like you ultimately end up want to get to as an organization from a position player standpoint. He is always going to be the really good ball player that doesn't necessarily grow on trees that every team wants. That's why the Dodgers wanted Tommy Edman. They wanted the versatility, very good ball player. But the Dodgers would also tell you, hey, now granted, they gave him a contract extension. They would tell you as well, though, hey, if we had to move on from him to go upgrade for something else, we would. And I would say that's what Brendan Donovan falls into for me. So I would say he's not a part of the core for you. I think he's a complementary piece that you're always going to say, hey, right now he's probably hitting a little too high. Now, maybe that changes this year because of we talk about banking wins, right, for the Cardinals. That allows for you for when that one bad month comes, it doesn't necessarily really hurt you in the standings. Brendan Donovan doesn't have a lot of really bad months. And the way that he's been able to kind of bank up his numbers right now for the hot start that he's gotten off to, maybe he ends up being better than I'm expecting, but I expect him still to kind of fall back to what he has been, which is a very good player, 10 to 15% above league average, but that's not a guy that I'm building around for your success in the future.
I don't know that I'm like building around him. He's not, I wouldn't put him in the same category even necessarily as a Mason Wynn. But when you think about having Donnie versus not, I want him to be a part of the core. And I think this is maybe where we come to a little bit of a disagreement on his value and the difficulty in extending him. Man, if I give him a 5-year, $50 million deal, that should not limit my ability to do anything. As the St. Louis Cardinals, a $10 million per year contract should change basically nothing about what you're able to do elsewhere. Part of that is because you are developing these young pitchers. At least that's the hope. And when you do that, it means you don't have to go out and sign the next Steven Matz. So I'm basically replacing Steven Matz's contract with Brendan Donovan. I would be more than happy to do that. You're getting rid of the Miles Mikolas contract after this season. That's $18 million a year. You're potentially having to spend less on your bullpen arms moving forward than you have had to in the past, where you're spending at times $8 to $10 million on some of those guys as well. So when I think about Brendan Donovan and his place in this franchise, it's similar to me to what Chris Taylor was for the Dodgers, where Chris Taylor was never one of their best players, never. And yet they gave him a 5-year deal, I believe it was at the time, 4 years deal worth $60 million. Now, that deal has not aged particularly gracefully. He's not a good player right now, but if you gave Brendan Donovan a 5-year deal today, it would take him up till 2 years ago, Chris Taylor. His age right now, he's 34 years old this season. He's got another year left on his deal. So they paid him beyond what I'm talking about potentially doing with Brendan Donovan. That's just the age process in Major League Baseball. I don't think there's a lot of downside in doing something like this. I think Brendan Donovan brings everything to the table that you could ask for a major leaguer. He's a great leader inside of that clubhouse. He does everything right on the field. He can play second, third, obviously, as we're seeing right now, in a pinch, shortstop, either of the corner outfield spots. He can DH. He's not a complete liability there for you. Hell, he was last year their emergency catcher in situations where they potentially needed him. I think Brendan Donovan is the exact kind of player that I would be looking to lock up long term. I think that the Cardinals at times have gotten themselves into trouble with this by doing it too often. I don't think there's any other player right now, today, that I would be looking to extend. There's nobody else on the Cardinals roster that I'd be looking to do that with. By the end of the season, maybe that changes. The one guy that I would talk about doing it with today is Brendan Donovan. And I'd be looking to potentially offer him this 5-year, $50 million deal based on what we've seen thus far, the health that he's had so far, and just overall the production that you get for that kind of a salary.
Yeah, so I want to go to the Matt's money becomes the Donovan money.
Sure.
The reason that I think you saw the Dodgers make this move, and granted, Cardinals, if they did this contract, probably doesn't go as poorly as it has gone for the Dodgers. But I think if the Dodgers told you, hey, we had somebody internally that we think can take that role in 2 years, which is basically what you got left with Brendan Donovan, I don't think they end up handing that contract to Chris Taylor. I think they overpaid it in his market to say, hey, we need a utility guy, which I don't think you necessarily need because they said, hey, we need a utility guy. They didn't have one on their roster, so they gave him this contract. And the reason I bring that up is because I think the Cardinals have the Donovan replacement coming in 2 years, and that is Thomas Saggese. I think Saggese can just do this role. He'll be cheaper. And you mentioned the money for, like, the Mats money. Hey, the Cardinals, they shouldn't be hamstrung by $10, $15 million. Hey, man, I don't know what their financial situation is, but they seem to be operating on a reduced payroll, so every penny is going to count for them. I mean, they declined options on Kyle Gibson, who would have helped this team looking 4 innings this season for $10 million. So I am more wary to hand out contract extensions, especially because there is no crystal clear picture for them down the road financially. I just think with Brendan Donovan, I don't want to take away as like coming off as I'm saying he's a bad baseball player. I think he's a good baseball player. I think he's the kind of guy, though, that I'm just playing through the system. He hits free agency, and then you let him walk, and then you replace him. I think he is a much easier piece to replace than, like, the superstars that don't grow on trees. And that's why I say, hey, when you got Saggese internally, we've talked about this, I think, on the podcast, too. Like, hey, what is the role for Saggese in the long run? It's going to, to me, eventually be Brendan Donovan's spot as the super utility guy.
And I'm in agreement. Like, I'm in favor of re-signing stars over complementary pieces, just to be clear. I also want to keep guys around that are huge components to what I'm doing while they're in their prime. And right now should be the Brendan Donovan prime. Prime in Major League Baseball, typically like age 27 to 31, 32. And that's where he's at right now. So this is probably the best version of Brendan Donovan that we will see. And hopefully, health permitting, he should be able to stay at roughly this rate for the next 3 years or so. I'm trying to buy it out those years. And I want to get to free agency with Donnie around age 32. So I think this would be good for Donovan. He was a little bit of a late bloomer for the Cardinals, so he didn't get all of that upfront money. He's probably not going to get a huge payday in free agency whenever he hits it because he'll be a little bit older than a lot of the guys are. We saw this offseason with a guy that's better than Brendan Donovan in Pete Alonso. He had to wait a little while and then ultimately didn't get the deal that he was looking for. We see these guys all the time hit the market at 31, 32. Teams use that against them, and then suddenly they're getting a 3-year deal instead of a 5 to 7 year deal. So I think it could be good for him. I think it could be good for the Cardinals because they're getting at a reduced rate to what they would have to potentially pay in free agency if he hits it in 2 years after his deal is up. But I would try to keep him around. Saggese is an interesting name that you just brought up. He's been really good so far. Better than I think even the biggest Thomas Saggese fans would have expected. Now, is he going to be a 450 hitter all year long? Probably not. He is going to be similar to Alec Burleson in this way, where his swing decisions are going to sometimes create a big hot streak like this, and his swing decisions at times will get him into trouble, where he has a 2-week stretch where he's 3 for 35. And that's just what it's going to be with Thomas Saggese. But right now we're seeing the hot streak. We're seeing the good version of that. I don't know how he plays into your plans. Genuinely, I have no idea. Right now, it's easy because Mason Wynn is on the injured list. Ivan Herrera is on the injured list, and that opens up some opportunities for other guys. Saggese has been at least one of the players that has been a benefactor of that. What happens when Mason Wynn returns, though? Because he's not that far off. It was expected to be a very short stint on the IL for him, just the minimum 10-day stretch. Do you keep Saggese up? Is he going to be a part of, not an everyday lineup, but maybe 2 out of every 3 days lineup? How do you make this work with him?
I think you have to keep him up. I think he's shown, hey, I belong to be up here. I've been swinging the bat very well for the St. Louis Cardinals. And Michael Ciani, like, though his role is to be a part of the hands team, I think you're getting closer and closer to a point where you don't need a hands team in the outfield because of how good Jordan Walker has been defensively. And I know we talked a little bit about that last week because we were expecting he potentially go down with the Gorman, and then they have the Wynn injury. But to me, there is a role for Saggese, and that's where I don't understand. I understand the thought process from the organization when they say, hey, we want some of our best prospects. If they're not playing at the big leagues, we want them down at AAA to be continuing to get at-bats. Okay, I get that. But I think Thomas Saggese's future here in St. Louis, for at least this season and probably next year as well, and maybe even 2 years down the road, would be as a right-handed bat that comes off the bench and a guy that kind of serves in a utility role to help get guys days off. And that's where, as we've seen, I feel like Ollie's been able to manage some of his best games this season because he has two right-handed bats that can come off of his bench now in Luke and Baker and Thomas Saggese when it comes to late-game situations when he needs to turn to one of those guys. So that's where I think he has a role for this team. I mean, Siani doesn't provide anything for you off the bench offensively, so you can't really bring him in if you needed to pinch hit for somebody in late-game situations. And if his role is just going to be defensively sound, I'm not sure they are significantly worse anymore when it is Nootbaar, Scott, and Walker as the outfield alignment compared to Nootbaar, Siani, and Scott. I don't think it is such a drastic drop-off that they have to keep Siani up here to try and help them seal late-game wins.
The drop-off is lesser defensively than it is offensively.
Yeah.
Like, the gap between Jordan Walker and Michael Siani offensively right now is much wider than the gap between Siani and Walker on the defensive side of the ball. And that was not the case a year ago.
No.
Year ago, 2 years ago, the gap between Siani and Walker was as wide as the Grand Canyon. And now it doesn't feel that way any longer. And at a minimum, Walker, I think you can make a case that he's a plus defender in right field right now. I think he's made more plays than you would expect from an average defender out there. And worst case scenario, he's average, definitely. So when you look at the way that his bat is playing right now, and it's around average, I think you'd just rather keep him out there. Where this gets difficult, though, is when you get all these guys back healthy. It's just hard to find all the playing time for Thomas Saggese. Like, even right now, Mason Wynn is on the injured list. Do you know how many times Thomas Saggese has played in the last 4 games? How many times he started a game over the last 4?
Started, I think it's 1, if I'm not mistaken.
1 start.
But he's played in 2, right? Because I think he's pinch hit.
Correct. So you can still get him opportunities, but this goes back to what you talked about with John Mozeliak and his philosophy on these guys. If you're a top 100 prospect, as Thomas Saggese is, you play every day. And that means you either play every day at the big league level or you play every day at AAA if that opportunity is not available for you here. I think this is a potential test case for them because I agree with you. I think Ollie has done some of his best managing offensively, like late game situations, now that he has multiple right-handed bats off of the bench to be able to basically platoon a couple of spots, especially DH with Luke and Baker, and then either of the middle infield spots, depending on when the situation comes up, typically for Nolan Gorman, but occasionally you'll see him do stuff with either Nootbaar or Donovan or Burleson as well. So he's able to have more flexibility late in the games. That's more important than having that defender that you can throw out there for a couple of innings after Jordan Walker takes what you hope is his final at-bat. But is that enough? Is that enough opportunity for Thomas Saggese in the eyes of John Mozeliak to be able to continue to develop his game? I don't know, because once Mason Wynn returns, I don't know how you get him any regular opportunities to start.
And the part that makes this really hard is the fact that, because like I mentioned, hey, 2 right-handed bats, so in theory you've got 2 guys that you can turn to if lefties come up, and there is like, I don't know, I'll use Tanner Scott as an example. Really dominant left-handed reliever that's coming into the game. Well, they're already avoiding Alec Burleson as a guy that they don't want to do this with, as we've seen. You know how many plate appearances he's taken against left-handed pitching this season?
Oh, God, it's got to be 5 to 10.
4. Yeah. It's 4. So they are really trying to avoid that. Gorman's taken just 3. So maybe if Gorman happens to be in the lineup for a righty, there's this spot. But really the only lefty that you would also look at and say, hey, we're going to pinch hit for, that's actually getting these at-bats. I mean, those two have combined, Burleson and Gorman have combined for 7 plate appearances this season. Is Nootbaar? Well, he's got a 828 OPS so far against lefties. You look at Brendan Donovan, he's got an 807 OPS against lefties. The only guy that is left-handed that's an everyday starter that's not hitting lefties is Victor Scott. Well, now if I don't have Siani, you don't really have that outfielder to turn to. So that's where this gets very difficult for them to decide. I still would personally, because I don't think you would pinch hit for Victor Scott, I would still carry Saggese because there are going to be games where Gorman is in this lineup and you will want to pinch hit for him late, and Alec Burleson potentially in the lineup as well at the same time. I think you have better options than there. But that's where it's going to be tough. I think you're right. This is the first real test for the St. Louis Cardinals. And my whole thing would be, again, if you do want him to be an everyday player, okay, but when is that coming here in St. Louis?
And this gets back to the Donovan discussion.
Exactly. And now what you're doing is you're almost creating a path to where you almost have to decide on his fate, maybe not at this deadline, for example, but potentially in the offseason of, is this guy going to be a St. Louis Cardinal? Because if we're going to view him as he needs to be an everyday player and we don't have spots, we either A, need to free up a spot for him, or B, we need to capitalize and not drain this asset, which they had done previously when you have talks about Dylan Carlson, Tyler O'Neill, those types of guys.
To me, it's almost a three-pronged question on Thomas Saggese. One, how do we view him? What is his role for us long-term? Because if you decide he can be a bench bat for us long-term, he can be a super utility guy that we use in very specific roles. If that's the plan with him, well, then just keep him up on the roster. This is the way that he's going to have to be utilized eventually, similar to a Luke and Baker, where they've just decided, hey, he's a right-handed bat off the bench that provides us a little bit of thump. So be it. If he plays once out of every 7 games as a starter, he's a guy that we can use off of the bench, and he needs to get prepared for that specific role. So that's one prong. Another is, what's our plan with Gorman? What is our plan with J.J. Weatherholt? What is our plan with Brendan Donovan? Like all of these lefties that play mostly second base for us right now, what is our plan? Who's a part of our future, and how do they influence what we can eventually do with Thomas Saggese? And then the third one, if you're looking at it, is just, it is that test. What is more important? Is it the development at the AAA level, or is it prioritizing our major league roster? And this is a spot where I've been so frustrated with the Cardinals in previous seasons of, you're not prioritizing what makes you the best team possible at the major league level. Prospects eventually have to become some kind of a currency. They're either currency via trade, or they're currency to make your major league roster better. And that can happen right now, or it can happen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. But that is how you can utilize them. And far too often, the Cardinals drain out that clock to the point where, all right, now we've got to make a decision. It's like, what happened the last 2 years when you could have utilized this guy in a role at the major league level? Maybe not the ideal role for anybody involved, but a role nonetheless. Saggese is clearly having some success with it right now. I would argue it's best for them, given where they're at as an organization, to at least see this thing through. Keep him up at the major league roster. Find out if it can work. Give it like a 2-week stretch. See how it works for him. See where he's at. If he comes in a couple of games and it looks like he's a little rusty and he needs more of those reps, cool. You can adjust accordingly. And then you make a decision to bring somebody else up for him. But I would love to see them just give it a chance. Find out what this can be with him, Thomas Saggese, and with Luke and Baker coming off of the bench after you get Mason Wynn back on the major league roster. That's the way I would like to see them go. I'm highly skeptical that's the way that it will end up going. All right, last thing that I wanted to get to here for the show today. Cardinals have a big week ahead, man. Yeah. Last week we talked, it was another massive week, and this was part of this stretch that we wondered, would this be when the season goes in a different direction? They win 4 out of 6 on the homestand against the Phillies and the Astros. Now you go on the road for 7 games in 7 days. You're playing against the Mets, who have a $300 million payroll and are, in their eyes at least, a World Series contender. And then you go on the road at Atlanta, who is playing some really bad baseball. They have not hit their stride yet, but I believe Spencer Strider is going to be back in the rotation by the time that you play them the next time around. And you just never know. At some point, they're going to turn it on. They've done this in recent seasons, right? Their World Series year, they were below 500, like basically up until the trade deadline, and then they went on that tear. Last year, they got off to a horrible start and eventually clicked for them, and they went on a run again. You don't want that to happen against you. What is your outlook for the Cardinals over the next 7 days with this really difficult road stretch? By the way, where they've had their struggles so far this year was the 2 road games that they had, Boston and Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and I'll be curious to see if that is something that they can kind of right the ship with, but it's not like it is easy opponents. For me, it's going to be, does this pitching continue to give you a chance? It's not going to have the, whatever it is, 1.38 ERA over the last
1.15.
It's not going to be that good. But can it be like 3.5? Can I get that from the rotation? Because if you get a 3.5 ERA through this 7-game stretch, you should be able to come out of this 4-3, I would say. Because I don't really I know the Mets have the best starting pitching ERA in baseball right now. I'm not behind it. I think this could be the series where the Cardinals offense says, oh, well, that was cute. Let's put you back in your place. it's the rotation for me that I'll have my eye on. And kind of the bullpen where they look in the middle innings. They've been trying to flirt with Ryan Fernandez getting back into higher leverage spots. They did that in the win yesterday against the Astros in the 6th or 7th inning, whichever one it was. I think that is the one for me that I've got my eye on. Can you do this on the road against the New York Mets, who've got a really good lineup, and the Atlanta Braves that, though, yes, they are struggling, can you keep that offense quiet right now while they are in a little bit of a rut into that Braves series? Because that'll be when our next podcast is after that one wraps up.
Yep.
Don't let the Braves turn it around against you. They are down right now. Make sure they remain down. And I get it. I think they are a better baseball team than what their record shows. They are probably not feeling that right now. And that is the series for me you have got to take 2 or 3 from. You lose 3-4 to the Mets or you split with the Mets, I'm not going to be too upset because I think they are a good baseball team all around. The Braves are the one for me. Hey, you've got to take advantage of it while they are down.
It feels very similar to the homestand that you just had. Like, you've got a couple of games here in this matchup against the Mets where it's very clear you just don't have the pitching advantage. Same thing was true against the Phillies, right?
Yeah.
You went into it and you're like, I don't know. I think in all 3 of those games against the Phillies, you went into it saying Phillies have the advantage on the pitching side of things. Just do. It's hard to argue otherwise. Well, in this one, I think you have the advantage on Thursday night against Canning versus Palante. I think that is slightly in favor of the Cardinals. Michaelis versus Peterson? No. Liberatore versus Senga? No. Gray versus Holmes? Sure. You probably have a slight advantage there. So that one is similar to me to the Philly series. Both teams were playing relatively well going in. You got to take care of business and hopefully at least split that one. The Atlanta one feels so similar to Houston, where you've got some good pitching that you're going up against. And really the question is, does the opposing offense wake up? Because Houston's offense has been terrible so far this year. Yeah. You just had great timing of when you saw them. It's not about who you play, but when you play. That old adage. Well, that was the case for the Cardinals against the Astros, and the Astros offense really never woke up in that series. The same thing you hope is true against Atlanta. If your pitching does what it needs to do against them, you should hopefully take 2 out of 3 in that series. You leave this stretch on the road, 7 games in 7 days. You come home and you should be above 500. And then I will be fascinated to see what the response is from Cardinals fans. If you come out of this stretch where we all thought season could potentially be teetering here, and they come home and they're potentially above 500, playing good ball. You've got Mason Wynn back from the injured list. You've seen some positive returns from the young guys. The pitching is better than you expect. Do people start, not jump all the way on board, do people start to jump back on board with the Cardinals at that point in time? I don't know what the answer is, but I'd be curious to see what the series looks like from an attendance perspective, from an engagement perspective, and just from an excitement perspective for the Cardinals versus the Milwaukee Brewers. Late April, weather should be a little better, weekend series, division rival, team that a lot of people thought was potentially the favorite to win this division. That'll be an interesting spot for them.
Yeah, I think it will come down to an interesting question of, what is good enough for Cardinals fans when they look at this team. Is slightly above 500 to your point? Because if you tell me, hey, the Cardinals will finish April, I'll jump ahead and we'll go through those final 2 series there. If they finish above 500 in April, I'd say a huge win because I had very low expectations for them in the first month, let alone for the entire 2025 season. I think I said in our debut episode, I think they're like a 72 to 75 win team. So if they finish above 500, they're just like game above, say. Does that get the fan base excited, or is the fan base still looking for the, okay, we don't care about. We want to see the team that actually is going to go out there and is 5 to 6 games above 500 that we believe is they not only can win in the regular season, but can do damage in the playoffs. I think that's what the fan base wants to see. So I don't know if even a winning road trip here really leads to increased numbers for that Milwaukee series next weekend. I think you're going to have to be 5-10 games above 500, and people are going to have to look at the team and say, not only are they fun to watch, but I can believe in their formula to winning not just the regular season, but winning in October.
And if that's the case, then there's just no way people are going to buy in this year. And that's fine. It is what it is. It just means that in 2025, because I don't see that as a realistic outcome for this specific group of players. Hell, the Blues just went on a crazy run to get into the postseason. Nobody is saying they are a Stanley Cup contender. Nobody. Even the wildest Blues fan that you've run into, they will probably acknowledge, I don't think this team can really win the Stanley Cup. I don't think that's in their range of outcomes. The Cardinals are not that team this year. They're hoping that by 2026, if they get positive returns this year, maybe 26 is the year that they can get back toward contention. So if that is the goal, if that is what it takes, that's the bare level minimum for them to be a worthy team to buy into, then it's just not going to happen in 2025. I want to see if maybe the people and fans have lower expectations and they want to buy into a young group of players that are at least fun to watch and can potentially take you on a ride to where you do get to experience playoff baseball for the first time in a little while here in St. Louis. That's the hope. That's the goal. We'll see if they're able to do that. Big 7-game stretch on the road beginning in New York, eventually Atlanta. T-Bone, when we come back next Thursday, they will have finished up this road trip. What is your prediction? What will they have done in these 7 games against the Mets and the Braves?
I think they will go 4-3. I think they will split with the Mets, and I think that they will take 2 or 3 from Atlanta. I think their offense, I think the pitching has found its feet now, so I think it's going to be fine. I don't know if it's going to be great, but I think it will be fine. If pitching is fine, the Cardinals are a above 500 team, not just for this 7-game stretch, but on the season. So I'll say they go 4-3 in these 7 games.
I think they do as well. If I was saying, hey, who are the players that I think are worthy of monitoring in this stretch, I've got a couple of them for you. One would be Andre Palante. I just want to see what's the ceiling for what we're witnessing right now with Andre Palante. Can he navigate this Mets lineup, and then what does he look like against the Braves as well? Those are 2 series that I think could be pretty telling for him, especially that Braves series, because they've got a lot of right-handed hitters, as opposed to many of the teams that he's gone up against, which are more left-handed heavy thus far. He would be one on the pitching side of things. On the hitting side of things, I want to see Gorman. He got off to a really nice start to the season in a role that he was not anticipating. He's still got a little bit of time here to get basically everyday opportunities while the Cardinals are going up against right-handed pitching with Mason Wynn on the injured list. I want to see what he looks like. Can he put together a nice 2-week stretch? And if so, what does that do for their decision-making on how they allocate some of the playing time? Alec Burleson has not looked the way that he did early last season. Could he, Nolan Gorman, take away some of those at-bats down the stretch, or really down the stretch of this month at least, from Alec Burleson? I think that's a guy that I would be monitoring over the next week as well.
Yeah, so from the pitching side, the one guy, and you're only going to see him once before our next podcast, and it'll be the Braves series. I'll be watching Fetty. And the reason I bring him up is I feel like he's been teetering on disaster, right? Like there's been the walk issue that's been a problem this year. He got out of, I believe it was, if I remember correctly, 2 bases loaded jams in his last start against the Astros. Well, all it takes is one of those to flip. And you're talking about a shorter outing in that game for him. And it only takes one of those scenarios to flip during this 6-man rotation to where you look at this and say, oh boy, now things can start to snowball on us. I think he's going to be fine, but I want to see him try and avoid some of those innings that are really starting to teeter on the potential of really sending his outing kind of sideways. And then the guy I'm going to keep an eye on offensively is Walker. You know, he's now below league average when it comes to his OPS plus. Where he's at right now is fine, right? I'm not saying he has to be 20% above league average this year. I've always said that this is the season where there needs to be some stabilizing for Jordan Walker. But his numbers are really down here in the month of April. I'll be curious to see if he can kind of turn it around as we get kind of halfway through this month, see if he can kind of find his footing again and get more comfortable in the batter's box and start to lift the ball a little bit, because we've mentioned this, he's on the ground a lot still. And if he's on the ground a lot, he may not be able to have the success that we saw early on in the season. So he's going to be the guy I've got my eye on for this 7-game stretch.
Cardinals have struggled so far on the road this season. They're back on the road between now and the time that we will talk to you again next. 7-game stretch. Mets and Braves, all road games between the Cardinals and 2 of what we thought were going to be the top contenders in the National League. He's Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video version of the podcast. If you haven't checked it out, again, youtube.com/101ESPN STL is the place where you can go. You can find all of the links as well at 101ESPN.com. If YouTube or the video side of things is not your thing, check us out wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's Apple, Spotify, wherever. You can find us over there as well. Be sure to subscribe to those and then download them as well. For Tanner, I'm BK. We'll talk to you guys next Thursday here on the Redbird Report.
Find every episode of the Redbird Report with Brandon Kiley and Tanner Hendrickson on YouTube or at 101ESPN.com.